Crazy Horse Memorial is the largest sculpture ever attempted by human beings, and it has been under construction for 78 years. Everybody assumes that is a story about money. On the 3rd of June, 1948, a man with $174 to his name drove 4 holes into a granite mountain in the Black Hills of South Dakota by hand, with a hammer and a length of steel. He set a charge and took 10 tons off it. 5 survivors of the Battle of the Little Bighorn stood and watched him do it. And we thought Mount Rushmore was big. Rushmore is 4 faces in a cliff. This man was carving a whole mountain in the round, so a visitor could one day walk behind the horse and find it finished on every side. Gutzon Borglum had federal money, a paid crew of 400 men, and 14 years. Korczak Ziolkowski had $174 and a second-hand gasoline compressor. He parked that compressor at the bottom of 741 wooden steps. It is the reason his mountain is still not finished. Before we go up, get the scale right, because almost nobody has it right. All 4 presidential heads on Mount Rushmore, taken together, contain less stone than the single head of Crazy Horse. That sounds impossible until you understand why. Rushmore is a relief, 4 faces cut into the front of a cliff, and not one of them has a back of the skull. Crazy Horse is being carved in the round. Neck, skull, the whole of it. One president's head measures 60 feet. The face of Crazy Horse measures 87 feet and 6 inches, and that is a finished, measured number, dedicated in 1998. The horse's head is planned at 219 feet, 22 stories of granite. The outstretched arm is planned at 223 feet, which makes it longer than any Boeing 747 ever built. And when the figure is finished, if it is ever finished, it will stand taller than the Washington Monument, the one we built on this channel a couple of weeks ago at just under 555 feet. Everything on that list except the face is a plan, not a measurement. We will say so every time. Over the next half hour, we climb this mountain in 5 stages: the man and the granite, and what he actually owned in 1948. The compressor called Old Buda, and the day he walked those 741 steps 9 times. The bulldozer that arrived 5 years late, and the company that died 19 days after it. The long haul to move 4 tons of iron uphill, and a conflict in the record that we cannot resolve. And what all of it cost, counted in decades, and in one man's spine. Then we go looking for the machine. That part does not end where you think it does. If that is the kind of thing you clicked for, subscribe. We spend most of our time on the machines that history forgets, and it turns out there are a great many of them. Stage 1. The granite and the man who picked the wrong mountain on purpose. Thunderhead Mountain stands about 600 feet above the pine forest around it, a stub of pegmatite and schist in a range of otherwise soft, weathered rock. Lakota elders had asked for the Black Hills and nothing else. Chief Henry Standing Bear wrote to a sculptor he had never met, saying his fellow chiefs would like the white man to know that the red man had great heroes too. The sculptor was a Boston orphan of Polish descent named Korczak Ziolkowski. His parents drowned when he was 1. He was raised in foster homes, badly, by a builder who fought prize fights at night, and he came out of that childhood knowing heavy construction and how to take a beating. In 1939, he worked briefly for Gutzon Borglum on Mount Rushmore, 17 miles to the northeast. We covered how Borglum solved that mountain in our video on the Greek trick that made Mount Rushmore possible, so you already know Rushmore was a machine problem before it was an art problem. Korczak did not last. The foundation says he was there for the summer. The National Park Service and several independent accounts say 19 days. What everyone agrees on is how it ended. He got into a fight with Lincoln Borglum, Gutzon's son, and the supervisor on the mountain, and Lincoln had to go into town for medical attention afterward. Later that same year, his marble bust of the Polish pianist Ignacy Jan Paderewski won first prize by popular vote at the New York World's Fair. That prize is what brought Standing Bear's letter. A sculptor who could win a crowd in Queens might be talked into spending himself on a mountain in South Dakota. He never took a class in sculpture. He learned wood in the shipyards of East Boston, working 6 years as a carpenter and pattern maker, and he taught himself stone from there. He arrived in the Black Hills on the 3rd of May, 1947. He was 39 years old at the first blast the following June, not 40, a number that gets rounded up in nearly every retelling, because he was born in September and the charge went off in June. There was no road to the site. No water line, no electric service, nothing but rock and ponderosa pine. He lived in an army tent for the first 7 months, then felled trees on the property and built himself a log studio home by hand. He promised the memorial would never take a federal dollar and that he would never draw a salary from it, and he kept both promises for 34 years. The first job on the mountain was a horizontal cut, a long, clean line running under where the horse's mane would eventually be. To make it, he needed compressed air, because compressed air drives a jackhammer. A jackhammer puts a hole in granite, and a hole in granite is what holds the dynamite. Every ounce of rock that has ever come off Thunderhead Mountain came off because a hole got drilled first. Stage 2. The machine. On the 1st of January 1949, Korczak Ziolkowski bought a compressor. Compressed air is a brutal and simple technology. An engine turns a piston. The piston squeezes ordinary atmosphere into a receiver tank, and that stored pressure runs down a line to a tool where it slams a steel piston up and down 2,000 times a minute. A rock drill of that era did not cut granite so much as shatter it, a few thousandths of an inch per blow, while the operator leaned his whole body weight onto a machine that was doing its level best to shake his hands off his wrists. Starve that tool of air, and it strikes like a tired man. The compressor was already old when he got it. By his own account, it carried 24 years on it at the time of purchase, which puts its manufacture somewhere around 1924. It weighed roughly 4 tons. Photographs show a squat, yellow machine the size of a small car, on steel wheels, with a crank handle at one end. Everyone at Crazy Horse called it Old Buda. She had steel wheels and no cab, and no seat, and she sat out in the Black Hills weather for 11 years. Here is a thing almost nobody gets right, and we want to be specific about it. Old Buda was the compressor. It was not the jackhammer. The memorial's own timeline says so plainly, describing one small jackhammer powered by a gas compressor at the bottom of the mountain. Go and read one of the artificial intelligence encyclopedias that have appeared in the last couple of years, and you will find Old Buda described as a jackhammer, twice, on 2 different pages. A machine that powered the tool has been turned into the tool by the machine that was supposed to be checking. It is the year 2026, and this is what we are dealing with. And the name did not come from whoever built the compressor. It came from the engine bolted inside it. The Buda Engine Company of Harvey, Illinois, was what the trade called a proprietary engine house. They did not sell you a machine. They sold the maker of the machine its heart, and then stayed invisible under somebody else's paint. Gardner Denver, one of the great names in air compression, dropped Buda engines into their portable compressors. Which brings us to something we cannot tell you. Nobody has ever published the manufacturer of the compressor housing itself. We know the engine was a Buda. That is where the record stops, and we are not going to invent the rest for you. What we do know is where it sat. It sat at the bottom of the mountain. The jackhammer was at the top. Between them ran a pipeline Korczak laid himself, 2,040 feet of 3-inch pipe around the base of the mountain, up the far side, and finally over the top to the working face. 4 tons of compressor down below, 1 man and 1 small jackhammer at the summit, and very nearly half a mile of steel pipe carrying air between them. Now everyone who tells this story tells you that the pipe was the problem, that air leaks pressure over distance, and that Korczak was drilling granite with a tool that hit soft. We ran the math. That is wrong. 3-inch pipe for a single jackhammer is generous by any standard. Over 2,040 feet, at the kind of air demand 1 rock drill pulls, the friction loss comes out under 1 pound of pressure. Add the weight of the compressed air column climbing 500 feet of mountain, and you land at roughly 2 pounds lost out of 100. Had he run 1-inch pipe instead, the loss would have been closer to 50 pounds, and the drill would have been useless. Korczak oversized that pipeline. He built the air system properly, and it worked. Every foot of it, laid by hand, around a mountain, in 1949. The 2,040 feet of pipe was the one thing on Thunderhead Mountain that never let him down. Which means the story everyone tells about this mountain has the villain in the wrong place. The pipe was not the bottleneck. The pipe was the only part of the whole arrangement that a modern engineer would look at and nod. The failure point was a 24-year-old gasoline engine sitting at the bottom of a mountain with nobody standing next to it. Research like this takes days of digging through timelines, tape, and trade records. Every documentary takes days of research. You can help us keep going by leaving a small donation, and there is a Buy Me a Coffee link waiting for you down in the description. Now, the steps. To get from one end of that air system to the other, Korczak built a wooden staircase over the winter of 1948. 741 steps. Ruth Ross, who had come out to the Black Hills in 1947 as a 20-year-old volunteer and would later become his wife, helped prepare the logs. For the first 7 years, he climbed those steps alone. He would crank Old Buda to life at the bottom, then start up with a 50-pound box of dynamite over one shoulder, a string of drill bits looped around his neck, and a drill steel 8 or 10 or 14 feet long in his left hand. Mountain goats followed him. They found the staircase early and never left, and they are still there, unbothered by 78 years of blasting. Then, somewhere around a quarter of the way up, he would hear the compressor die. A gasoline engine of that vintage started on a hand crank against compression, which meant standing over 4 tons of iron and heaving a steel handle until the magneto found a spark. There was no remote start. There was no second man waiting at the base. There was no fixing it from where he stood. 700 feet of staircase above it. So he put everything down and walked back down. He cranked her until she caught, waited 5 minutes to be sure she held, picked the dynamite and the bits and the steel back up, and climbed the 741 steps again. There was nothing else to do. The nearest man who might have helped him was living in a tent in the trees, and it was him. At the top, he still had to clean his air valve, oil the hammer, seat the starter steel, and begin. He would get about a foot into the granite. Then he would hear it again, that cough and stall from far below, and he would set the hammer aside and start walking. There was one day when he did that 9 times. 9 trips down and 9 back up. More than 13,000 steps, most of them under a load of explosives, to drill a single hole. By our reckoning, that is somewhere near 4,500 feet of climbing in one working day, roughly 3.5 times the height of the Empire State Building, on a mountain, carrying dynamite to restart an engine. He said afterward, in his dry way, that it got awful old. Sit with that, because it is the whole answer to the question everybody asks. People look at Crazy Horse Memorial and see a family, a fortune, or a philosophy. What was actually happening on that mountain, day after day, for the better part of a decade, was one man losing entire working days to a machine that needed a hand on it, at the wrong end of a wooden staircase. He was not beaten by primitive equipment. He was beaten by arithmetic. A machine that needs a hand cannot stand 2,000 feet from the only hand there is. Stage 3. And this is where the machine story turns strange. For 5 years, he worked that mountain without a bulldozer. Every blast made rubble, and the rubble had to move, or it buried the next cut. He shifted it with hand tools and a wheelbarrow and whatever he could rig, and clearing the ground in front of where the face would eventually be consumed 5 years by itself. On the 13th of October, 1953, he bought his first bulldozer. We looked hard for the make and model, because that is the detail our audience deserves. The memorial's own timeline records the purchase and the date and nothing else. Not a manufacturer, not a horsepower figure, not a serial number. Photographs from the years that followed show Korczak on Caterpillar crawlers, so Caterpillar is a fair reading. The model has never been published anywhere we could find, and we are not going to guess, because guessing about equipment is how a channel loses the operators who keep it honest. 19 days after he bought that bulldozer, on the 1st of November 1953, the Buda Engine Company ceased to exist. Alice Chalmers bought it. That purchase had nothing to do with sentiment. It was defensive, and it was frightened. General Motors had just taken over the Euclid Road Machinery Company, the Ohio firm that built the off-highway haulers we covered in our episode on Euclid trucks. The moment General Motors owned Euclid, Alice Chalmers looked at its own supply chain and did not like the view, because its diesel engines came from Detroit Diesel, and Detroit Diesel belonged to General Motors, and General Motors now sold earth-moving machines in direct competition. So Alice Chalmers went out and bought an engine builder of its own. It bought Buda in Harvey, Illinois, folded the works into a new engine division, and rebranded the diesels under its own name. The men in Harvey kept their jobs and lost their company. Buda stopped being a company 19 days after a sculptor in South Dakota finally got a machine that could push. 72 years of building engines for other people's machines ended inside a single autumn because General Motors had gone shopping in Ohio. The compressor at the bottom of the staircase did not know that. She kept running, badly, intermittently, but running, with a dead company's name on her flank. Every operator who has kept a machine alive past the death of its manufacturer knows exactly what that feels like. Korczak was living it alone, on a mountain, with a hand crank and a box of dynamite. Stage 4. Getting her up the hill. By the early 50s, he had at least stopped carrying everything on his back. In April of 1952, he rigged an aerial cable car up the mountain face. Everybody called it the Bucket, and it was driven by an antique Chevrolet engine, hauling tools and drill steel to the summit. That same year, he started the cut for the profile of Crazy Horse's face. The year before, he had painted the full outline of the sculpture directly onto the mountain, using 176 gallons of white paint in lines 6 feet wide, with Ruth standing far below in the parking area, calling corrections up to him so the proportions would read correctly from a distance. They married on Thanksgiving Day, 1950. They would have 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls, and for a while the children attended a one-room school on the property. Korczak used to say, with a completely straight face, that they had 10 because the boys were needed up on the mountain and the girls were needed down at the visitor building. But the compressor was still at the bottom, and moving it up was the only idea that mattered. Now here is where we have to be honest with you, because the record does not agree with itself. The memorial's own timeline says that on the 23rd of July, 1960, the Buda compressor was moved to the top of the mountain. That same entry says the cut in front of the face was finished down to the chin, that the gravel avenue of the chiefs was built, and that the first dozer was working on the summit. 4 things, 1 date. 2 independent accounts put the road 3 years earlier. One says a whole winter, 56 into 57, was spent blasting a road along the backside of the mountain, which let Korczak drive up in a jeep and take the Buda compressor to the top. The other says the back road went in during 1956 and the Avenue of the Chiefs the following year. We checked, and we cannot resolve it. The Foundation's timeline uses the 1st of January as a placeholder in several years, and its 1960 entry bundles 4 separate events under a single date. The secondary accounts cite nobody. Somewhere in Rob DeWall's books or the Rapid City Journal archive, there is a page that settles this, and we could not reach it. What we can say is what the memorial itself says. Old Buda arrived at the base in 1949. The memorial's own timeline puts her on the summit in 1960. 11 years. By the day she got there, the Buda Engine Company had been gone for 7 of them. And there is one more figure worth holding, though it rests on a single source, and we will not pretend otherwise. By one account, electricity did not reach the top of that mountain until 1966 or 67. If that is right, then for 18 years, the only power at the working face of the largest sculpture on Earth was compressed air, pushed uphill through 3-inch pipe by a hand-cranked engine. Before we go on, 2 questions for the people watching this who have actually run machines. If you know the model of that 1953 bulldozer from a photograph, a receipt, a caption, anything with a source behind it, put it in the comments. We will run it down, and we will credit you. And while you are there, tell us the worst air supply you ever worked behind, and how far the compressor sat from the tool. Stage 5. What it cost. Between 1961 and 65, Korczak and his growing family finished the first leveling above the outstretched arm, started the tunnel underneath it, and built a scaffold weighing 26 tons that rode on rails in front of Crazy Horse's face. 26 tons of steel on tracks, on a mountain, existing for no purpose except to hold men still in front of stone. The tunnel was the worst of it. Crazy Horse's arm reaches out across empty air, so the granite beneath it had to come out entirely. The opening under that arm is planned at 70 feet wide and 100 feet high, and every charge fired under there was fired directly beneath the thing they were trying not to break. The finishing work deserves a word, because it involves one of the strangest tools ever pointed at rock. In 1947, the Linde Air Products division of Union Carbide began developing a flame jet piercing burner for the iron mines of Minnesota. It burns fuel oil and oxygen through a nozzle and throws a supersonic flame past 3,000 degrees. The flame does not melt the rock. It shocks the surface. The mineral crystals inside expand at different rates, and the stone spalls away in flakes. The first hole was pierced on the 9th of July, 1949, in taconite on the Mesabi Range. The granite of the Black Hills is full of quartz, and quartz goes through a change in its crystal structure at temperature that makes it want to come apart. The same rocket burner that opened the taconite pits is what polishes the face of Crazy Horse. Opening a single eye took 4 months, 560 bore holes, 1,373 feet of drilling, and then the torch. A mountain sculptor makes 2 kinds of mistake. One kind you fix with more work. The other kind you never fix, because granite that has been removed does not come back. There is no undo on a mountain, and there was no second Thunderhead standing by if the proportions came out wrong. On the 6th of September, 1977, Korczak fired a blast that took 40,000 tons of rock off the mountain in one stroke. 4,000 times the first one. The date was chosen. Crazy Horse was stabbed in the back by a soldier at Fort Robinson under a flag of truce on the 6th of September, 1877. Korczak was born on the 6th of September, 1908, 31 years later to the day, and somewhere in the middle of the 1970s, a bulldozer went over the edge of that mountain with Korczak's son in the seat. His name was Casimir. Cass. He had been on that mountain since he was a boy. He ran the blasting, and by any honest measure, he had logged more hours on Thunderhead than his father ever would. A component failed, most likely a bolt, and the machine went off the side of a 600-foot mountain. Now, here the two accounts do not agree, and both come from people who were there. Ruth Ziolkowski told the Chicago Sun-Times in 2006 that a bolt broke, that Cass jumped clear, and that the bulldozer tumbled roughly 200 feet down the mountain and landed on its tracks, still running. The memorial's own orientation film says the same thing, that one bulldozer went over the edge and the driver leapt to safety in the nick of time. Cass himself told a magazine something else. He said he stayed in the seat and rode it all the way to the bottom, crashing off rocks and trees the whole way down. He said it was fun. He said that when he finally reached the bottom of the mountain, he climbed out of the seat and he walked home. His mother says he jumped. He says he stayed. We are not going to tell you which one is true, because we do not know, and neither does anyone else who has written this down. What is not in dispute is what Korczak said when he came down and found the machine lying at the bottom of his mountain, running. He told his son, "You got it down there, now you get it out." And Cass got it out. He dragged a bulldozer back up the side of a mountain that had just thrown it off, because his father told him to, and because nobody else was going to. Word of it reached Peoria. According to Ruth, and this rests on that single interview, Caterpillar sent the family a letter awarding them 25 shares of common stock, with the company president remarking that Caterpillar already had testing grounds and had not really needed anyone to fly a bulldozer off a mountain. Cass ran equipment on Thunderhead for decades afterward. So did the machine. The money question deserves one straight paragraph, because it is the other thing everybody asks. Twice, officials from the Interior Department offered $10 million in federal funding. Twice, the Ziolkowskis turned it down. Korczak's answer was that he held copies of 365 treaties the government had made with the Indian, and asked why he should believe this one would be kept. You will also read about a separate $10 million, a private challenge gift from a philanthropist in 2011. Different money, different century. Do not let anyone conflate them. And neither offer would have shortened a single walk down that staircase, because what Korczak needed in 1950 was a compressor that would stay running. He died on the 20th of October, 1982, at 74, having worked that mountain for 34 years with 6 spinal discs removed across 4 operations and 2 heart attacks behind him. By his death, somewhere between 7.2 and 7.5 million tons of granite were gone. You will see 8 million and more attached to that date. Those are modern cumulative figures, and they do not belong to 1982. Ruth ran the project for another 3 decades. 7 of their 10 children took jobs on it. Under her, the crew drove the face to completion, and it was dedicated on the 3rd of June, 1998, 50 years to the day after 4 hand-driven holes took 10 tons off a mountain nobody was watching. If you want to keep climbing these mountains with us, subscribe. We take one machine at a time. We tell you where the record ends and where the guessing would start. And we let our audience correct us when we get it wrong, which is most of the reason this channel works at all. Next time out, we stay with the men who kept these things running, because the machine is only ever half the story. Which leaves one question: where is she now? There is a compressor at the visitor complex at the foot of Thunderhead Mountain. Yellow, squat, about the size of a car. Somebody has wired a small sign onto her exhaust. Visitors have photographed it since at least 2012, and one man who visited years earlier noted the sign was not there before. there is a single word on that sign. It says, kaput. That word is Korczak's own. He told it on camera, the way she would fire up at the bottom, and he would climb, and a quarter of the way up he would hear her go kaput, 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 and turn around. But here is where the record runs out on us again. The Crazy Horse Memorial Foundation calls the machine Old Buda in its own timeline from 1949. It has never, anywhere we could find, said that the yellow compressor in the visitor complex is that machine. The sources say Korczak used at least 2 second-hand compressors across the decades. Nobody has ever published a photograph of the nameplate, so we are asking. Somebody watching this has stood in front of her. If you have a photograph that shows the badge, or if you simply know more than we do, put it in the comments or send it to us. We would rather you found it than us. 78 years, 10 million tons of granite, and we cannot say for certain where the machine is that wrote the schedule. We have spent a lot of hours on this channel with machines that governed history from the wrong end of a rope or a hose. The steel cable that killed more men at Hoover Dam than any other hazard on that job. The cable scrapers of the 1930s that moved half of America across itself before hydraulics existed. Long before a project is limited by vision, or money, or politics, it is limited by whatever sits between the operator and the rock. The mountain goats are still on the staircase. Korczak's descendants are still on the summit, working the hand and the forearm and the horse's mane, with cranes up there that he never saw and would probably have found ridiculous. Nobody alive today will see it done. The people in the comment section of every Crazy Horse video ever posted understand that perfectly well. They write that they first saw the mountain at 10 years old and that they are 76 now. They write that they hope to live long enough to see the head. They write that their children will not see it finished either. And then they say, finish it anyway. Korczak understood that better than his critics ever did. He used to say it made no difference when the mountain was finished, only that the work continued and that there was always progress. Coming from almost anyone else, that would be an excuse. Coming from a man who walked 741 steps 9 times in one day to drill a single hole, it reads as a plain statement of fact. She is still down there somewhere at the bottom of the hill. Somebody should crank her over one more time.